What's up, basketball fans? Welcome to the Wardrobe Report. It's time to talk about the Toronto Raptors because a lot was made after they acquired Jakob Poeltl, yet they did not move guys that were in the rumor mill, including guys like OG, Gary Trent Jr., and Fred VanVleet as well. So for today's video, I'm going to be discussing what the Raptors should do. Obviously, all indications point to the Raptors making the playoffs, but what is the best move to make during the offseason? Is it to rebuild or is it to retool? I'm going to be making a case for both. I'm also going to be doing a prize giveaway as promised, guys. So if you're a Raptors fan or if you're a non-basketball fan, make sure to comment below whether you want a t-shirt or a hat and of which team. I'm going to be doing one Raptors giveaway and one other NBA giveaway as well. All you have to do is make sure to comment down below of which team you would like gear of and what you would like, a t-shirt or hat, and then also just make sure your subscription is public. I will enter you into a contest and the winners will be announced March 2nd. So if you're ready to watch this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you wish to hit the subscribe button as well, that would be very much appreciated. So with that being said, let's get into today's video. Now, as you guys know, I do like to give out shout outs on my channel, and the shout out for today's video goes out to Elisa. So Elisa, thank you so much for supporting this channel through your likes and comments. It is very much appreciated. Now let's talk about the chances of Raptors tanking and building the future around Scottie Barnes. One thing I really want to emphasize on, because obviously a lot of Raptors fans this season felt like it would have been the best case scenario to try and get someone like a Victor Wembanyama. Now, obviously, that is a rare case, and you're not always going to get guys like Victor Wembanyama, which is why so many fans wanted to tank. But I wanted to take a look at a few draft classes, in particular, starting from 2020 and going backwards to 2017, because there's a lot to pinpoint at. Because a lot of basketball fans may want a top 10 pick, but there are a few things to talk about when regarding top 10 players that are drafted. Now, there's a trend I came across that really caught my eye in terms of top 10 picks. When you look at top 10 picks, obviously this is the 2020 draft. What I've noticed was there are 2 or 3 really good players in the top 10 draft class, and then there are usually a handful of guys that are not living up to expectations. So looking at the top 10 draft here in 2020, you obviously got Anthony Edwards, LaMelo Ball as well. And although the case is still out on guys like Patrick Williams and Obi Toppin as well, I think it's fair to say that the likelihood that you get a superstar player in the top 10 is not as high as many people believe it to be. In fact, you look at this draft class, it was a really strong draft class. But I want you to focus your attention on guys that are drafted outside of the top 10. So guys that are drafted between 11th and 20th. You take a look at some of those players. Like, look at guys like Tyrese Halliburton. I think it's fair to say he would be easily one of the top 5 guys, top 3 guys drafted in this draft class. But obviously we know why he dropped, because his shot looked awkward and just a lot of teams passed on him. And then there's also guys like Precious Achiuwa, Tyrese Maxey as well. So I really want to emphasize on the fact that a trend I really noticed with a lot of draft classes in particular was that you may have a top 10 pick, which seems really attractive. And yeah, the chances of you finding an all NBA talent or even a superstar player might be better in the top 10 than in, let's say, in the 15th spot. But it is one thing to note. The top 10 usually has about 2-3 really good players, a bunch of good role players, and a handful of busts. The picks between 11 and 20 usually has some really, really good role players. And there's usually about 2 players between the 20 and 30th mark, which are absolutely phenomenal players. As you see here, Tyrese Maxey is a really good player. And obviously Desmond Bane, as we know, that's history. Everyone passed on him because of his short arms as well. And don't be surprised if you see Jaden McDaniels become a really good player in the NBA. But even taking a look at some of the other draft classes as well, look, every draft class is going to have your Zions and Ja Morants. But outside of that, like, you really have to question. Every Raptors fan wanted a top 10 draft, and it could still happen. You never know what happens with the Raptors the rest of the season. But there are always guys you could draft like Kobe White, Jackson Hayes, Rui Hachimura, Cam Reddish, who aren't going to live up to expectations or simply going to be good role players and not all-star players that many people expect them to be. In fact, when you look at outside the top 10, there's always a handful of players. Like I said, even with the last draft class, I wouldn't compare Tyler Hero to a superstar talent, but he's a really good player when you compare him to some of the top 10 guys in this draft. Again, outside of Ja and Zion, obviously, RJ is really good as well, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to draft a top 10 player. And again, going through some of these draft classes, again, yes, you're going to have your Lucas and Trae Youngs, but you could also have your Kevin Knox as well, right? Like, look at SGA, where he was drafted. Look at some of the other names as well when you go through some of the draft classes. Anthony Simons was drafted 24th. So not all things are bad when we talk about top draft classes. And obviously this one is top heavy, but if you're a Raptors fan and you're watching this, honestly, I know it's the hype built around Victor Wembanyama, and I understand it, and Scoot Henderson as well. But give me 2 names outside of that that could really alter your franchise. I know people, and as fans, we naturally get very excited when we see guys like that and we think we're absolutely going to draft him. There's no guarantee you're going to draft him, even if you were to tank. Now, take a look at this draft class, for example. This was a really good draft class. But again, where are these players now? Lonzo Ball was a great player, but he may never play basketball ever the same again. He's shut down for the season. Josh Jackson, and this is the 2017 draft. Let me remind you guys, this is only about 6 years ago now. Josh Jackson couldn't even crack an NBA roster on the Toronto Raptors. So while many people are focused on that, and yes, you're going to have your Jason Tatums, you're going to have De'Aaron Fox as well, but look at the top 10 draft. You can't honestly tell me there are more busts on this list than there are superstar talents. So having a guaranteed top 10 draft does not mean anything. In fact, I really want to emphasize on the spots between the 11 and 17 mark. You got obviously Donovan Mitchell there. You also got Bam Adebayo as well. But even look at some of the guys in the 20s. As I emphasize, it seems like between the 11th and 20th mark, there are about 2 or 3 guys that end up being really good. And then between the 20th and 30th mark, there are usually 2 guys that end up being really good. In this case, Jared Allen, OG Anunoby. And let's not forget about Kyle Kuzma right there as well. And then, of course, Josh Hart is a solid role player. In fact, when you went through the last 10 years, this is what I found. Players drafted in the 11 to 16 range in the last 10 years, you look at some of these names. Giannis Antetokounmpo, Zach LaVine, Devin Booker, Miles Turner, Domantas Sabonis, Donovan Mitchell, Bam Adebayo, SGA, Tyrese Haliburton, Alperen Şengün, and yes, I snuck in AJ Griffin as well, but I truly believe he's going to be a phenomenal talent. He was supposed to be a top 5, top 7 draft pick, and he fell. So he's averaging 9 points as a 19-year-old. Expect him in 2-3 years to really wonder how he fell down so far in his draft class. Again, it's one of those things, while many fans are really high on the top 2 guys in the NBA draft, which is understandable because that's what NBA is all about, getting excited about free agency, getting excited about top guys in draft classes. I think we need to expand our range and start looking a little bit outside of the top 10 guys because there is a ton of talent and you could do this on your own. Even go back 15 years and look at some of the talent that was drafted between 11 and 20th, even expanding the range a little bit. This is just 5 draft classes. So again, the Raptors could make the playoffs and still finish here and draft a really good player. I know there's been a lot of issues with a lot of fans stating that we should have teared down, build around Scottie Barnes as well, but I want to touch upon that as well because there's a lot I have to say about that. Now let's pretend that the Raptors decide to tear down in the offseason and decide to build around Scottie Barnes, which might be the case. Look, he's a really talented player. He's going to be 22 years old though coming into next season. So realistically speaking, when you look at cases of NBA players leaving their teams, it's usually around the 26, 27 age range, which gives you around about 4 or 5 years to really build around Scottie Barnes. And obviously, keeping in mind, you obviously already have some young players as well, like Christian Koloko, like Precious Achiuwa, and then of course you got Gary Trent and OG Anunoby as well. But you really got to question, are those guys... I'm not talking about Scottie Barnes here, guys. I'm asking about Gary Trent Jr., OG Anunoby, Precious, and Christian Koloko as well. Are those guys ever going to be a number 2 option on an NBA championship, let alone number 1? The honest answer, I should say, is no. That's not going to happen. Whereas you have guys like Pascal, who has proven to be a solid number 2 option on a championship roster. So the goal, whether you decide to retool or you decide to rebuild around Scottie Barnes, should always be to win a championship in the future. And I think the Raptors, as much as this may irk a lot of people, because given the fact that the Raptors are playing very poorly this season, I think the Raptors are closer to a championship now than to try and tear it down and rebuild. Now, I want to emphasize on a few things there because I was talking about Gary Trent Jr. and OG Anunoby, and you look at their points per possession, which is essentially saying how many points do they generate per possession. You look at Gary Trent Jr. with 0.67, OG Anunoby, who wants a bigger role. Again, I love these guys, but you need to have an honest conversation about things like this where you say, well, we should build around Scottie, OG, Gary. We got a lot of good players. They are good players, but you take a look at how many points they're producing per possession. OG Anunoby is producing 0.6 points per possession, and on the far right side, where you see the red circle, that is the percentile they belong in. OG Anunoby is in the 7.5 percentile. For those who don't know, that is terrible. And how many points he's producing per possession. So that's just to give you an idea of where the Raptors should stand, obviously, in terms of trading away players. Now, I know a lot of people would be quick to suggest that you can trade away Pascal and acquire draft picks and young players. And one thing I do want to mention in regards of that is look at what KD got in return. Let's be honest, I know KD's older, but you're not going to get a return as good as KD. And they got Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, and they got a bunch of picks there. But is Mikal Bridges or Cam Johnson ever going to be a number 1 or 2 option on a championship team? They're really good players. Don't get me wrong, guys. They're really, really talented players. And we saw Mikal Bridges drop 40 plus points, but he's never going to be a number 1 or number 2 option on a championship roster. So while the idea of trying to tear it down and rebuild around a really good player like Scottie Barnes, it isn't as simple as many people believe it to be. I think the best case for the Raptors is to try and retool, move some of the guys, move some of the players that you can in the offseason. And look, I want to pinpoint to one more thing here. When you take a look, as I highlighted, like the 11 to 16 range is where the Raptors could potentially pick. But let's not forget the Raptors do have the option of acquiring another first round pick because they may look to move OG Anunoby and or Gary Trent Jr. And they have a lot of different options in terms of that as well. Like, let's pretend the Raptors are drafting 16th, right? And the Raptors want to move in the, let's say, 10-11 range. They do always have the option of not only acquiring another first round pick, they can always try and trade a player to move up in the draft for 5 spots as well. So do not be surprised if the Raptors do that. So they can make the playoffs, get the young players some reps, get them some playoff experience as well as move up in the NBA draft. Now, in terms of the Raptors making the playoffs, I do want to talk about this as well, because a lot of people have been talking about this recently, stating that the Raptors have the 5th toughest schedule remaining in the entire NBA. And one thing I will say in regards to that is the last 3 games of the season for the Toronto Raptors, they're playing Boston Celtics twice and Milwaukee once. So you have to ask yourselves, like, those 3 games against Boston and Milwaukee, they're not going to be playing their star players at the end of the season. So those should be much easier wins than a lot of people anticipate. And also, just given the fact I think Raptors play good teams really well. Now, in order to really fully understand the Raptors' chances of this, I'm going to go back and forth with these 2 slides, because the Raptors currently are in the 10th spot. They're 14 games behind first place, and that's not going to happen. But in terms of talking about how far they are in games behind, I do want to talk about the fact that they are only half a game behind Washington, who I believe has played an extra game. And then Atlanta is also up there for some of the toughest schedules remaining as well. I also expect the Brooklyn Nets. I'm going to go back once more just to highlight this. Brooklyn Nets have the 7th toughest schedule remaining. Also, let's be honest, like, Brooklyn Nets also got a lot of those wins because KD and Kyrie as well, who are no longer on the Brooklyn Nets as well. So I think the Raptors' chances of making the playoffs is great. I don't think it's that bad. And in terms of just talking about the Raptors' aspirations for the future in terms of winning a championship, I'm going to quickly throw this in there as well. If you're going to win a championship in the future, which the Raptors should absolutely do in the next 2 to 4 years, you have to look at the competition in the Eastern Conference. The Milwaukee Bucks and Boston Celtics are probably going to remain there for quite some time, at least for another 4 seasons. But some of the other teams, let's talk about them. Philadelphia 76ers, Joel Embiid is aging. James Harden is about to be 34. He's already 34, I believe. He's a free agent. He very well could leave. There's rumors that he may go to the Houston Rockets. So if Houston Rockets get James Harden, or let's say he decides in another season or 2 where they keep failing in the playoffs, are those 2 star players going to be the next KD and Kyrie, where they decide they're going to move on because Joel has had enough of trust the process? Like, you have to question, that team is out of the picture all of a sudden. Teams like the Miami Heat have an aging star in Jimmy Butler as well, who has missed a ton of games every regular season. So who's the real competition outside of Boston and Milwaukee? Obviously, the Raptors still need a star player, and I think they could do that, right? They could do that with some of the talents they have in return for OG Anunoby, some of the picks they may have. Now, all of a sudden, that gives them more picks to trade for a superstar player. I don't necessarily think the Raptors making the playoffs is a bad thing. It gives some of the young guys a playoff rep, and also some things we do need to realize, guys, is, let's be honest, you trade everyone away right now, the Raptors' offense gets that much worse. Precious Achiuwa is not going to replace Pascal's production, nor is anyone else. Scottie Barnes is really good, and he may very well obviously average more points, but I'm worried about the rest of the guys, right? Like, the efficiency is going to go down. They're benefiting from playing with guys like Pascal right now. And also, we got to talk about Jakob Poeltl as well, because his impact on the Raptors has been amazing, albeit only 3 games. And although his offensive rating is a little bit inflated there, with 133 offensive rating, his defense has obviously been amazing. 109 defensive rating is pretty good in today's NBA. And I think ultimately, look, I'm going to go back on the screen. Look at the points per game here, and look at the opposing points per game. The Raptors right now currently are giving up 112.5 points. I think they could bring that down to 109 points, and that would ultimately lead to a lot of wins. So I think the Raptors are ultimately going to jump some of the teams here like Washington, Atlanta, and Miami. Not Miami, but I expect the Brooklyn Nets to drop a little bit. And I see the Raptors finishing around 6th or 7th spot. But I'm very curious to hear your thoughts about this. Like, I know people are so focused on the top 10 draft classes, but there's so many good names the Raptors can still draft, and let alone acquire another first-round pick in this year's draft for OG Anunoby, or potentially look to move up as well. So I'm very curious to hear your thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And as always, I do have a trivia question for you today. And that trivia question is, how many times have the Raptors had a draft pick in the top 10? Is it A6? Is it B12? Is it C10? Is it D14? Or is it E9? So whoever answers this trivia question correctly first in the comment section gets a shout out in my next video. So that will be it for today's video, guys. Thank you so much for watching this video. And I hope you guys have yourselves a great day.